Hello, this is Lynn Jameson. I'm the Executive Director of Special Services for Castleberry ISD, and this is our annual Extended School Year, or ESY training, with a twist, because this year we're also going to be talking about what we are calling COVID-19 Learning Loss Services. So what is Extended School Year Services? ESY means Special Education and related services such as OT, PT, counseling, music therapy, etc., that are provided to a child with a disability beyond the normal school year, usually during the summer, in accordance with the child's IEP and at no cost to parents. So it's free to our parents and it meets the standards of the local education agency and Castleberry ISD and the Texas Education Agency. When would ESY services be needed? Well, when there's documentation that exists that shows that the student has exhibited or is anticipated to reasonably exhibit severe or substantial regression in one or more critical skills or critical areas of the IEP without extended school year services or services beyond the regular school year. We start looking at this within the first 8 weeks of school. And how it works is you look at the student's progress report from May 2020 and any areas that are considered critical where the student had mastered goals. Then within the first 6 to 8 weeks of school, you compare and contrast that documentation from May 2020 to the first reporting period, which is due on October 1st for this school year. And you compare to see if the student had mastered that goal in May, have they now regressed and not recouped that skill within the first 8 weeks of school, which is October 7th. So a good baseline would be the first October 1st, no later than October 7th, which is the 8th week of school. If by the 8th week of school, the student has not recouped that mastered skill that they had obtained in May of 2020, and the student may be in jeopardy of not continuing to make progress without services, then you would begin monitoring that student for the remainder of the school year to determine if they might need services outside of the regular school year. How do you determine which skills are critical? Well, you as the professional, as the teacher, or as the service provider, along with the parent and the IEP team committee members, would make that decision. So a critical skill would be any skill that, if lost, would result in a more restrictive instructional placement, instructional setting, or instructional arrangement. And without that skill, they wouldn't be able to make progress in the general curriculum. So it's not every IEP goal in the student's ARD, but select skills that are determined to be critical, that without them they would regress, wouldn't make progress in the general curriculum, and may need to be moved to a more restrictive setting. Critical skills could include any goals and objectives that may result in loss of self-sufficiency or independence, like self-help skill areas. And this would be evidenced by an increase in the number of direct service staff or the amount of time required to provide that special education or related services. Another area that would be considered a critical skill is without that goal, without that skill, the student would lose access to being able to independently live or be a productive member of society in terms of employment. So you're going to start by looking at goals that the student mastered in May, determine which of those mastered goals in May are critical, and where is that student now, the first reporting period or within the first 8 weeks of school. And if that goal was mastered in May and then throughout the summer they lost that critical skill, that would be an area that you would want to monitor for severe or substantial regression. So what is severe or substantial regression? That would mean that the child would be unable to maintain one or more acquired critical skills without extended school year services. Okay, just to clarify, extended school year services, again, they're related to critical skills in the IEP. It's not summer school. It's not to make progress in the general curriculum, the TEKS, not necessarily. It's critical skills in the IEP. They can be functional, they can be communication, they could be behavior, they could be life skills, they could be instructional. It's not used for daycare. It's not respite to give parents a break, and it's definitely not summer camp. We often hear that, it's going to be camp. Well, it's not. It's to address specific critical skills in the IEP that the student had mastered and then regressed and needs this additional support to maintain that critical skill. So we're not introducing new skills or new targets or new objectives, but rather to maintain existing goals in the IEP that are considered critical. Extended school year services is not for students who exhibit regression that is solely related to a medical problem or a degenerative or transitional life condition or situation. So it's not required when a student fails to achieve IEP goals and objectives during the school year if the reason they're not progressing is because they have a health condition, a medical condition, or a degenerative condition that even with extended school year services or services outside the regular school year, the student would not make progress due to the severity of the medical condition. How is ESY determined? Well, it's determined on an individual basis by the ARD committee or the IEP team. It's based on multiple sources of data, and it's provided to students without regard to the disability. So oftentimes I hear, this student's not eligible for ESY because they have a specific learning disability, or they're not eligible because they don't have autism. Well, ESY can be provided to any student that receives special education and related services, regardless of the type of disability they have. It's not about the disability condition, but rather it's about the critical skills in the IEP that the student had previously mastered. And then when we took a break, like during the summer or over Thanksgiving, Christmas, or spring break, the student regressed on those critical skills and then did not recoup them within a specific period of time, which right now we're only looking at the first 8 weeks of school. School districts may not unilaterally limit the type, amount, or duration of services. So in other words, they can't create a cookie cutter type of ESY services and say all students are going to get the same services in the same location, the same frequency and duration. It has to be individualized based on the student's needs. So it cannot be cookie cutter. Extended school year services can be delivered in a variety of environments, including the student's home, the student's school, the student's community. So it just depends on the student, their needs, and what the critical skills are and where those critical skills are best delivered. Here are some guiding questions when thinking about ESY services for your students. Does an analysis of the IEP, when you're reviewing the IEP goals and objectives, does it reveal or show that the student made progress? If the answer is yes, the student may not be eligible for ESY. Can the IEP be met during the regular school day? If the answer is yes, the student may not be eligible for ESY services. For those select students who had mastered goals in May that are considered critical and then regressed on those goals throughout the summer when school returned and did not recoup that goal within the first 8 weeks of school, here are some additional questions to consider. If the IEP cannot be met, are the current services adequate? Are they appropriate? Should we first consider increasing the frequency and duration of services for the students so they'll make progress? Second, what changes have been made to the current schedule of services to better meet the needs of the student? Keep in mind that the general population in the summer, they're at Six Flags. They're vacationing with their family. They're at home playing video games. They're doing different enrichment activities with their friends and family. So it's very restrictive to recommend or require students to participate in extended school year services when the general public, that's not what they're doing in the summer. And so the first thing that you should consider is, how do we need to modify the IEP to better meet the students' needs during the regular school year to avoid having them come to school in the summer? What are the Castleberry ISD procedures and timelines when considering ESY services? Well, we're going to do a review of the district's calendar so you know the specific dates of when you need to be turning in documentation for students that you're considering for recommendation of ESY services. Each of you will be provided this regression recoupment data report or form. What you're going to be tasked with doing is, in this first column, is where you will document the critical skills identified in the IEP that the student had previously mastered from May of 2020. You're going to record what that IEP goal is here in the first column. And then in the second column, you're going to record the previous level of mastery. So from that sixth 6 weeks progress report from May of 2020, was that goal mastered, and what was the rate of mastery, the percentage or the ratio, the criteria that the student met, is what you would put in the second column. Then you'll continue to monitor that goal through the next coming weeks or months over time to see, did the student recoup it throughout the school year before considering extended school year services in June of 2021. So remember, you're doing a compare and contrast of how the student progressed on a goal from May of 2020 through October 2020. You'll need to complete this regression recoupment form for every student, not just students with the most severe to profound disability, and not just students that are being considered for extended school year services. This form is documentation that it was considered for every student. For students that are not being recommended for ESY because there's no evidence of regression on a previously mastered critical skill, you will just hang on to those forms, and if we're audited for some reason, or if I need to see the documentation or the data, I would reach out to you. However, for students that do demonstrate severe or substantial regression on a previously mastered IEP goal between May 2020 and October 2020, you will turn that in to the special education director, to me, so I can know that these are the students that are on the radar to be considered for extended school year services in the spring due to regression on a previously mastered critical area identified in the IEP. And you will need to turn these into me by November 6th. So you'll start that documentation by the 8th week of school, and then you'll have additional time to monitor that goal, and then let me know, hey, I'm monitoring the student. This one's on my radar for consideration of services in the spring or in the summer of 2021. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. So now we've been monitoring and documenting throughout the fall and the first couple of months of 2021. So no later than April 1st, I need to be informed of students that have not recouped those critical skills, and therefore you are going to be going to ARD to make a recommendation for extended school year services. So I need that final roster or list of students by April 1st, 2021. The reason for this is there is quite a lot of planning at the administration level for facilities, financial services, human resources that all have to be considered for the services that we need to provide to these students. You'll need to be communicating with your educational diagnostician along the way, because each of those students will need an ARD meeting no later than May 7th. For the students that you are recommending for ESY, there will be several other forms that are going to be needed, and those will be reviewed with you closer to that date, the spring. Okay, stay tuned for part 2, which is our COVID-19 learning loss services.